noise.
Welcome back to the next part of this Truth and Rhythm episode. Be sure to subscribe to this channel. If you've already done so, please share it with friends. Also become a member by joining Truth and Rhythm on Patreon, or consider donating at funkinstuff.net. Thank you so much for your interest and support. Enjoy.
And you kept rolling. How'd you connect with the Gap Band?
Okay. At Mom and Pop's, there was this assistant engineer who worked with us on all these projects, right? Gloria, his name was Rick Clifford. And Rick Clifford was one of those guys that just loved networking. He would be different studio every night or hanging out, just sweet guy, nice guy, and just didn't like going home after our session was over. He'd go somewhere else. And he started hanging out at Total Experience quite a bit. And he came to me and he said, I was having some issues with management at Mom and Pop's as with regard to pay. They came from that Motown philosophy, is that, we're giving you opportunity, so we're going to pay you very little. They were paying me as much as George was paying me to assist him. And not even time and a half. I was working 60, 70 hours and they wouldn't even pay me time and a half. So, and we had all this success. I said, come on, it's like share the wealth a little bit. And they didn't want to hear that. And so when Rick said, you should come meet Lonnie Simmons, I said, okay, let me go have a meeting with Lonnie. So went over to Total Experience. I met Lonnie. And the Gap Band had just released, I think, Gap 1 or Gap Band. I don't know if it was called Gap 1. But, and it had some minor success. But the Gap Band was trying to emulate Earth, Wind, and Fire. I mean, if you listen to some of those records, they sound like an imitation of Earth, Wind, and Fire. And, there's only one Earth, Wind, and Fire. There's no point trying to go after that. So anyways, he hired me, and then he paid me an engineer's salary. And the first record we did was Gap 2, which had Shake a Leg or Stepping Out, a couple songs that were, again, very, very much sounding like Earth, Wind, and Fire. But then there was this one song, it was like a party song. It's like one of these P-Funk kind of party songs. It was called Oops Upside Your Head. And that was just intended to be like an album filler, not as a single release. But that caught on. And the guy that wrote the lyric to Oops Upside Your Head, or at least the title of it, and if you will look at most of the successful singles that the Gap Band had, you will see the name Rudy Taylor. Rudy Taylor was Lonnie Simmons' assistant, and he was like the studio manager. He was this sweet guy that would put out fires, keep everything working, make sure everybody had what they needed. And you'd always throw around these silly little phrases, everything is on the one. Oh, she dropped the bomb on me. And he would have these phrases that became the biggest hits for the Gap band. So I did Gap 2, the whole thing. And Oops Upside Your Head was the big single, and the record went gold. So Lonnie was thrilled. And to him, it was like, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. He hired me to do Gap 3 because this was the first successful album they had. He thought I may have had something to do with it. I don't know. He didn't want to, ruin a good thing. So he hired me to do Gap 3. And we started recording, and many of some of the songs again sounded like Earth, Wind, and Fire. And then Charlie Wilson from the Gap band is mostly heralded for his amazing voice. But what people don't realize is Charlie was a badass mini Moog player, and he would play all those Moog parts of bam, 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 bam. That was Charlie, and he would come up with these things out of the blue. He would just walk in. I always had a mini Moog set up, just in the event Charlie would come in and just start riffing and come up with something. So he did this song, bam, 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 bam. And Rudy was sitting next to me, and he started writing some lyrics. And he wrote, you told me to go up the block to buy you a strawberry pop. And when I got back to the flat, you had burned rubber out the back. I went to the closet and looked at your clothes. All I saw was hangers and poles. And I'm looking at this lyric, and I go, you got to be kidding. This is the silliest lyric I've ever heard. Was one of their biggest hits. And it was a result of unintended consequences. They got big because of these quirky little phrases that Rudy would come up with. And he also came up, you dropped the bomb on me. That was him. And so...
Did you also come up with Humpin' Day and Night?
Yeah, if you look at the writing credits, yeah. And so Burn Rubber was a big single off the Gap 3 album. And then Ronnie would come in with finished tracks. Ronnie was kind of like the producer who was there making sure everything was going well. He was the most level-headed of all the guys. Lonnie Simmons was basically in the office running the record company, but Ronnie Wilson was producing the records, and he came in with Oliver Scott, and they had this song called Yearning for Your Love. And again, it's a very kind of Earth, Wind, and Fire sounding track, but it was a great track, and it ended up being a hit on that album, and it's my favorite mix of all the Gap Band stuff that I've done. And so that's how I got. And so Lonnie wanted me to work on Gap 4 and Gap 5.
Gap 4, I would say, was their pinnacle of an end-to-end, just really strong album.
Yeah.
Outstanding on it, and
Yeah.
Dropped a Bomb and Early in the Morning, and Yeah.
Yeah. Um, I had moved to New York for just to get a change of scenery. So I wasn't involved in Gap 4 as much. I did do some towards the end. I stayed in New York. I was hired by the Hit Factory. Ed Germano hired me, and I said, you know, I don't have any clients here in New York. And he goes, don't worry, we'll get you clients. And turns out he didn't. So I ended up moving back to LA towards the tail end of Gap 4. So I wasn't involved in Outstanding and some of the other songs. And then fast forward to Gap 5, I was hired to do that, did the majority of that album.
I happen to love, I don't know if you were involved with it or not based on what you just said, but Talking Back on Gap Band 4 is a really cool, funky song. Kind of a callback to Oops Upside Your Head a little bit. But that Moog sound that you mentioned, I mean, the Gap Band just made a industry out of picking up that Bernie Worrell style from Flashlight with Parliament and making it a little more commercial.
Yeah. Yeah, Charlie doesn't get enough recognition for his Moog playing, but that was the sound of the Gap Band.
I know you had a lot of bigger records, but one I'm especially curious about because of their legacy is Shadow, because they were 3 former Ohio players. Ohio Players, one of my favorite groups. So what can you tell us about that? I know you did at least 2 of their records, as according to what I see.
I did one of the records. I did the Shadow album that was called Shadow, the one that was produced by Leon Ware and entirely co-written by Leon. Phenomenal musician. I remember we did that at a studio called One Step Up in Los Angeles because it was upstairs, and 3 incredible musicians. I mean, Billy Beck, keyboards, phenomenal, and Diamond on drums, and Chet, and I mean, but the biggest influence on that record, and I was listening to it the other day, was Leon. I mean, that's kind of like a Leon Ware record being performed by the group Shadow. It had all his sensuality. I mean, Leon's the most sensual person I've ever met in my entire life. He had sex oozing out of every pore of his body, and I'm sure he was highly responsible for the whole Marvin Gaye thing going in that direction because he was working with Marvin at that time. Leon and John Barnes wrote some songs that.
How'd you connect with Yarbrough Peoples? I mean, obviously it was on the same Total Experience situation, but another huge hit.
Yeah, and that was in the middle of one of the Gap records. I don't know if it was between 2 and 3 or 3 and 4, but there was another band that Alani signed, and they had this song called Heartbeats, which we worked on forever. I mean, it was one of those songs that nowadays it was kind of the set a precedent to how much people were willing to spend on a single. I think they spent close to $250,000 on that one single, getting it just right. I don't know what they were looking for, what Lonnie was looking for, but he ended up going over and over and over, and it ended up becoming a hit. But the first version to me sounded very similar to what ended up being the record. We spent a lot of money on that single. And I did work on some of their other songs there, but because I was just kind of in the mix there at Total Experience, I worked a little bit, I think, on the Goody album. I just kind of was getting passed around to the different.
Whatever happened to Goody? Is he still with us?
I have no idea.
Hmm.
I have no idea. I know Rudy Taylor is not with us anymore, but the Gap Band can look, because the lucky stars that they found Rudy, because I think he was the reason they became so successful.
Secret weapon.
Yeah, and unknown and uncredited. I mean, he's credited on the albums, but in the interview, they never mentioned the impact, the influence that Rudy had on the success.
Well, it seemed like
the other thing was that Charlie became very close with Rudy, and became like this little security blanket. When he would do his vocals, I would set up 2 stools in the studio, one for Charlie to sing and one for Rudy to be right there next to him, just to give him encouragement and make him feel secure. It was a sweet relationship, and Rudy contributed a lot.
I was just going to say, it seemed like the Wilson brothers were very much about, them as the family brothers getting the credit and the spotlight. They didn't give that much shine to like the band and some of the other players.
Well, yes, and no. I mean, everybody was encouraged to contribute songs. Oliver Scott helped a lot with some of the music. He worked with Ronnie, and yeah.
So like all the artwork only has the 3 of them, kind of.
Oh yeah. You don't see the band members, and no, you're right. Yeah.
You also continue to work with people like Enchantment. They were kind of past their prime, but still a great vocal group. And Switch, what other experiences in the 80s stand out to you?
Well, after the Gap Band experience, again, my relationship with the Gap Band, basically with Lonnie Simmons, was over money. There was a disagreement as far as what was agreed to on Gap 5, and we had different ideas about that. So I kind of parlayed that into going over to Silver Spoon and started working with Leon Silvers. After he formed his own company, because he was with Solar for a long time and did all those big hits with Shalimar and Whispers and all that. And then he started this own production company, which perhaps wasn't such a great idea. But I started doing some work for Solar, and it was a group called Collage, and that was at the Galaxy Studios. We were the first project. They had just built the studios. That was Dick Gurphy's new location. He had this building on Cahuenga. So I did the whole Collage album. And some work with Dynasty. And then I got a call from Michael Stokes. Michael Stokes was an A&R executive at A&M Records, and he was impressed with the work that I did with the Gap Band, and so he hired me to produce to engineer some songs some albums that he had produced. Sherrick was one. Enchantment was another. Active Force was another. That was a great record that didn't get enough attention, in my opinion. It's some great music, great sound on that album. Around the mid 1980s, John Barnes and I reconnected, and that was kind of a new chapter in my career. John and I first met.
I know you were talking about connecting with John again, but I also wanted to find out if you had anything, insights to share related to Leon Silvers, because he's become somewhat enigmatic, and he's really quite revered as a producer. Looking back, incredible run of hits and success he had. I've actually tried to get him on the show, and he said yes, but then it hasn't happened. So I'm interested in any insights that might be gained related to him, if you have any.
Yes, Leon was a protege of Freddie Perry. What I saw Leon do in the studio was exactly what Freddie was doing. And Freddie had produced the Silvers records, so that's how they got connected, and that's where Leon learned a lot of his production skills, in my opinion, because he would do the same thing as far as vocal sessions, monitor very, very softly like Freddie did. Leon had a tendency of laying down vocal tracks ahead of time, his version of it for the singers to copy. So he would go down and do like a rough vocal of how he wanted the vocal to be, and they had to copy his performance. So that was true with, I think, with Whispers and Shalimar. So I found that kind of interesting. So Leon knew exactly what he wanted, and he just kind of, I think the again, starting his own production company and dealing with all the business issues detracted from his creativity. He was doing really well with Dick Griffey and Solar and not having to worry about that. When he opened up his own company, the things got a little, it started to fall. And yeah, he's kind of disappeared from from things, but he's an extremely talented guy. And it was very nice to me. But we had to part ways because they couldn't pay their bills, and I was doing all this work and not getting paid. So I said goodbye.
I had a couple of just sort of technical questions for you while I had you. One is, what do you do when someone comes in and maybe they have an orthodox approach to how they, do an instrument or get certain sound, or, how do you mesh with that? I'm thinking of something like I'd heard Bootsy Collins. He came in with that crazy bass setup that he had, and Jim Vitti, was like, "You're crazy. This isn't going to work," kind of thing. And then they did it, and it turned out to be like fantastic. So, any experiences like that where you thought something might not work and it turned out to be really good, or that sort of thing?
No, but I am completely open to what anyone wants to try. Hard, fast rules. I also learn from the Massenburg school, just try to keep it as transparent as possible. But if, sometimes certain sounds or certain effects fit the part, whether they're clean, distorted, or whatever. If it feels good in the track, then I'm all for that. So sure, let's try.
Yeah, throw against the wall, see what sticks, kind of thing.
Yeah.
How do you know, for you, how do you know when it's the one? When you're at the point, this is it, we're done.
It's very different now from the analog days and studio days in that you had time limitations and you tried to get the best result that you could in the time that you had. Nowadays, we have the luxury of working from our homes with this amazing technology and without looking at the clock. And so we could doodle with a mix for hours and days, trying to get it put. Back then, we didn't have that luxury. And so, but back then, there were no mixing engineers per se. There were recording engineers, and recording engineers did both. There was no separate distinction between a mixing engineer and a recording engineer. It's just assumed that you would do both. So if you cut the tracks, you'd mix it. Nowadays, it's thanks to Bob Clearmountain, who single-handedly invented the mixing category, mixing engineer category. Nowadays, if you present, if you sent a song to mix, you need to spend some time to familiarize yourself with the tracks to see what's there, and that takes up quite a bit of time because this is all new material for you. So you have to see what's there, when they play, how they've managed track management, because these people working from their apartments now, they don't know how to manage tracks. That's my biggest issue. I find myself organizing and fixing stuff more than mixing. Back then, I recorded, or the engineer recorded the track, so they knew exactly what was there. So come mix time, you're familiar with everything that you have to work with. And so it's just a matter of putting up the faders, getting a nice balance, and you could be done in a few hours. As a matter of fact, it wasn't common to mix 2 songs in a day. With a Gap band, I mixed Yearning in the morning, another song at night. I forget which one it was. It was an up-tempo thing because I like doing up-tempo at night because it keeps me up. And then I thought we were ready to go home. We did 2 songs, and Lonnie says, "Okay, put up Burn Rubber." I go, "What? It's midnight." He goes, "No, we need to be a mastering by Monday. Come on, put up Burn Rubber and mix it." I said, "Well, okay." So we put up Burn Rubber. By a couple hours, I couldn't hear a thing. I said, "Lonnie, this is pointless. I can't." So he sent me home, and he called in Mike Evans at 3 a.m. and Mike finished the mix. But not that was back then, and like I was mentioning earlier with the Gloria Gaynor single, we did mix the one in the morning and one at night. Nowadays it's different. There's good, there's both negative and positives to be said about working at home, because you do have the freedom of time. You can control your own time. But, you can be something to death, hoping you're trying to get it just a little bit better, just a little bit better. So there needs to be a point. You just have to set like a deadline.
Jack, was there a particular artist that seemed more dialed in to the mixing and engineering process than another, or were they mostly all just kind of like walking away, you take care of it?
Well, there were producers that would walk away and take care of it, but they knew what they were looking for, They knew that if it was slamming or not, there's certain producers you couldn't pull the wool over their eyes because they just knew on something. Like Freddie Perrin was one of them. Which is why he left me alone in the mix room. He says, "I know, I'll know if it's if it's grooving or not." So there are other guys that have no clue and have you do it 10, 20 times just so they have something to pick from. George Martin had the best explanation about producers. Said there's basically two kinds of producers. There are those that drive the bus and those that sit in the passenger seat and give directions. So you have like a Quincy Jones or David Foster or Freddie Perrin that are driving the bus, making sure everything, calling all the shots. And then you have the others that hire good people and get them to but don't really know for sure, but they put their trust on the people that they hire. As far as the greatest relationship I had with the producer was with John Bonds. He trusted me implicitly. He just gave me free rein to do whatever I wanted and didn't question anything, and paid me the highest compliment. Because I worked with him for the first time on Peaches and Herb with Freddie Perrin back in the early days, and he came in to do a keyboard overdub. And he called me the very next day, and he says, I have some projects. I want to work with you. He says, you mix like a musician. And I go, okay, let's work. I didn't know that much about John at the time because we had just met, but then I realized what a phenomenal talent he was. And that coming from him was quite.
And you've worked on movies with John, right?
Yes, but that happened by accident. So after, in the late 80s, after Gap and Leon Silvers and Michael Stokes, John set up his own studio on Melrose, and he asked me if I wanted to work with him, kind of as a staff guy, and work on his projects, because he was starting a record label. And I said, sure. We did a few projects, but we never had chart success. John was a good writer, composer, but he never found his equal as far as a lyricist. He never found his Bernie Taupin, I like to say. And we never had the kind of chart success that we were hoping for, or he was hoping for. But he was a phenomenal talent. I mean, John didn't start playing keyboards until he was musical. He played other instruments, but he started playing keyboards when he was 19. And by the time he was like 23, he was touring with Bill Withers, one of the biggest acts in the world. I like to say that he didn't find the piano, it was the piano found him, and just an extraordinary talent that you can't teach somebody by going to music school. This is what he was hearing in his head. Just incredible inversions, voicings, beautiful stuff. In my whole career, I've not worked with a bigger natural talent than John Barnes. So his brother, Robert, Robert, is a very successful entertainment attorney. And he was representing this filmmaker named Julie Dash. Julie Dash had just finished a film called Daughters of the Dust. And she had hired a composer to write the film score so they could present it at the Sundance Film Festival in January. And this was like November. And so her composer hadn't done anything, hadn't submitted any kind of music to it. He hadn't even started. So she started to panic, and she went to her attorney, to Robert, and said, "Well, actually, you know, my brother John is a really good musician. Maybe you might consider having him do it." So John had never done a film score before, and they agreed to do it. And then we went into lockdown mode for a month. John had his synclavier. That's another whole story. Synclavier is that instrument that has all these real acoustic sounds that come out of a keyboard. They're samples of real instruments, violins, cellos, drums, any instrument. And that was John's work piece. And so we started composing the music for the film. And because it was synclavier, John brought in also this went on to become a renowned engineer and software designer, Andrew Sheps. He was working for New England Digital at the time, which owned synclavier. And so John brought him on, and the three of us for the whole month of December were just locked into a studio, working shifts where John would compose. Then he would offload the tracks to Andrew, who would send them to me, and I'd record them and mix them. And so that was the process that we did. And the soundtrack was stunning. It was a masterful. One British reviewer said it's one of the 50 greatest film scores ever written, and it really was phenomenal.
What year is that?
1980, around 1980, 81, I believe. And the movie went on to get great reviews. It's a beautiful movie. So once Hollywood discovered John Barnes, they came calling, and we started to get film projects from the big studios, from Paramount, on a project called Bebe's Kids, from Warner Brothers on the Wyman Brothers, I believe, the comedy team. Anyways, So we started working on films and soundtracks, and we did John was not only did he do the film score for Baby's Kids, but he submitted 5 songs for the soundtrack that all got accepted. This was for Capitol Records, and so we were putting together a wish list of those 5 songs. Who would we love? Fantasy. Who would we love to perform these 5 songs? And John wrote all of them. And this is a good example of John's, creative genius and listening to those tracks. So we said, well, for this song, we'd love to have Aretha Franklin. And for this song, it'd be great if we get the Emotions. And for this song, Ronnie Isley from the Isley. Anyways, it all came true. We got all of the artists that we wanted, and we released this wonderful soundtrack from Bebe's Kids. But John was a classic procrastinator. He would leave everything until the very last minute, and then we would go in panic. And Hollywood doesn't work that way. Hollywood doesn't give you that much leeway with the music project. So eventually they stopped calling. And so I continued to work with John because I felt I was in the presence of a savant. Every time he put his hands on the keyboard, you never knew what was going to come out, but you knew it was going to be perfect, and it was going to be brilliant, and it was going to be beautiful. So I figured, I'm not going to get rich being here, but I'm going to experience some beautiful music. So I stayed with John, and then life happened. My mother had heart disease, and she needed my help. The doctors gave her like about a year to live. She fooled the doctors. So I moved up to take care of her back to the Bay Area. She fooled the doctors and lived for 8 more years. So I was with her the entire time, taking care of her. And then when she passed away, I came back to Hollywood. And, Hollywood has a short memory. And they John was still here, and whenever he would have a project, he would always, I would be the first call. If it was his project, if he was a producer, I would always get the first call. If he was hired by somebody else, he didn't have that set. But the last thing we did together was over at the old A&M studios with Chaka Khan just a couple of months before the pandemic started. And that's the last time I saw him alive. And then the pandemic came, and I was, in a way, somewhat blessing in disguise for me, in that, okay, all the studios were shut down, but there were people making music at home, a whole new generation, and everybody was making music primarily out of their homes, and they needed mixers to put a little lipstick and polish on them so they sound professional. So I put my profile on this site, the biggest music exchange in the world, called SoundBetter. I don't know if you're familiar with it, I've heard of it. It's soundbetter.com, but they offer any kind of music service you want, whether you need a kazoo player, a tabla player, a songwriter, a mixer, a mastering engineer, anything related to music you can find on this site. And so because it's on the internet, it's global. So I'm on this site, I have my credits there, and people are contacting me now from all over the world this morning I just got a request from this young kid in the Netherlands to mix a couple of songs that are in the kind of R&B disco thing. So I am now working from home and fielding job requests from everywhere in the world and working at my at my leisure.
That sounds pretty good to me.
You know, I can't complain. You know, and you know, there's a music club just down the street from me that is unique in that they have a complete video setup and a whole Pro Tools rig, so that they record all the performances that performed at the club. But not only do they perform it, but they webcast it live. So they were looking for some help, and you know, I needed to kind of get out of the house a little bit because I was at home all day long mixing. So this gave me an opportunity just to go out, and so I worked there, mixing the webcasts on certain nights, and it's, you know, the talent pool in LA is like no other place in the world. I mean, there's so much undiscovered talent here, and it blows my mind going to this club and seeing all these incredible musicians just coming through. And it's basically for me like being in a studio, because I'm recording all these people as if it was, you know, a studio setup. The bands come in, and it's all different genres of music, whether it's jazz or rock or folk or new age, new wave. So it's a little nice little balance that I have.
Yeah, it sounds like a good situation to me. Jack, I wanted to ask you before we wrap up, was there anyone that you ever met along the way that you were kind of starstruck meeting?
Probably Chaka. You know, I've always liked her the most of all of the female vocalists. She's had such a unique sound. You couldn't really put her in a bag, gospel or R&B. She's just, yeah. I would have to say it was Chaka. But, you know, John took me to, we went to Detroit to record Aretha. And that was up there as well. So, yeah, I'd have to say those two.
Yeah, I don't know if you've heard me say on the show, but I make no secret about Chaka being my favorite female vocalist ever.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
just I don't know if you if you saw on my website that I have a picture there of Chaka and I. That was the last, I think I told you, the last session I did before the pandemic. But there's a nice little picture of the two of us, and she was very sweet. Just, you know, it was funny because Jay-Z was down the hall working, and he had never met Chaka. And he asked permission if he could come in and meet her. And we said, oh, of course, you know. And so he walks in, and he was like a little kid. He was in such awe of Chaka. You couldn't believe it. But he was a total gentleman, you know. He came over, shook my hand, introduced himself, shook everybody's hand. But he just was in total awe of Chaka. It was cute to watch, actually.
I saw her in 1978 at the Roxy Theater in Hollywood with Rufus, and man, when she talk about challenging the engineer, when she would hit those screams, I mean, just blow the roof off. It was just unbelievable.
Yeah. Yeah, you can't put her in a bag. She's just got her own style. I love it.
Which project, looking back, are you most proud of?
My you know, my favorite mix, I'd have to say, is Reunited. I like mixing ballads. I'm more of a romantic, and I like uh, the mid-tempo ballad. My biggest success, obviously, was "I Will Survive," but I like I'd mentioned earlier, "Yearning for Your Love" and "Reunited" are two of my, and that goes, you know, back a long time. But uh, now I feel like I'm a better engineer than I've ever been, especially since some of these tools are coming on. I don't know, when George was on your show, he was mentioning that he was developing this new compressor that was coming out, and it has come out, and I purchased it, and it's a work of art. It's not a piece of software. It's just phenomenal. So I have the best tools in the world right here in my apartment, and doing some really impressive work.
Well, I envy you because, I always wanted to pursue that, but my parents said you got to go into a profession. I wanted to go into audio engineering. You got to go to college for it, which is cool. I'm not sure if they had a program like that where I was living, but didn't pursue that. Was a mobile disc jockey for years and years, and just nuts with mixtapes and making my own things happen. Even to this day, I'm still using things like virtual DJ and just making, my own, music and putting things together. It's something special for me, for sure,
Great.
even to this day. Yeah.
Yeah, well, you've developed a wonderful site, and like George said, your heart is in R&B, which we all love, and we are appreciative of you sharing other people's stories from the past. It's a nice service.
Glad to do it, and glad that you reached out for your story. And thank you so much for sharing it, Jack.
My pleasure.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of Truth in Rhythm. A big thank you goes out to our guest as well as to you, the viewer and listener. Also, much gratitude to Pleasure for supplying the show's funky opening and closing music. As a reminder, you can always access the complete list of linked shows by episode at funkandstuff.net. I urge you to support this program and receive the extra benefits along with that by subscribing to the Funk and Stuff channel on YouTube and sharing it with funk, R&B, and jazz lovers, joining Truth and Rhythm's membership program at Patreon, submitting a donation at funkandstuff.net, buying Everything is on the One, the First Guide to Funk book at Amazon, shopping at the Funky Things store for cool merchandise at funkandstuff.net, and linking through funkandstuff.net for all of your Amazon purchases. In addition, if you're an artist or anyone seeking proven, results-oriented professional marketing, PR, writing, or editing consultation or production, check out the media services section at funkandstuff.net. Also, I encourage you to drop me a line at scottg@funkandstuff.net. I love the feedback, suggestions, guest requests, appearance and sponsorship inquiries, and just talking about my favorite subject, groove-based music. For now, and as always, this is Scott Dr. GX Goldfine saying, keep on vibing to the rhythm of the one.